But now we do have obviously the highlight of the evening. We're obviously delighted to have the chairman of the party here. I mean, if there is a man who needs no introduction, it's Nick Griffin. So I won't waste your time. Nick Griffin.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at the launch of our campaign for the London mayoral election, and of course along with that for the London Assembly. And whatever the results of the mayoral contest, the far left, the Liberals, the Tories, all the lot of them are terrified of and convinced that we will win a seat or seats for the Greater London Assembly. And I believe that we will as well. It's really very important. In the election just gone earlier on this year, we missed out by winning a seat in North Wales by a whisker, by about 1% in a similar proportional representation system. Now, of course, we have the advantage in North Wales that the majority of people, the overwhelming majority of people in North Wales, are either North Welsh or people from towns like Oldham and cities like Birmingham who've fled there as white flight, and they're all very receptive to our message. But up there, you know, we're something which is only just beginning, whereas down here in London we're much better established in the minds of our people. I'm absolutely convinced of this. If we'd frozen the demographic change of London where it was 4 years ago, then we would walk probably 4 or 5 seats, as a matter of fact. If we've been able to freeze the demographic change from 10 years ago, we'd be looking at a Barking and Dagenham landslide for our people on the Greater London Assembly. As it is, we don't know how much damage the tsunami of immigration that's afflicted London over the last couple of years, and the corresponding enormous white flight out of it, we don't know how much damage that has done to our core vote. We simply don't know. So it's all up for grabs, but we've got to grab it. And it's largely about what's done in the next few months by people. This is the first of a series of 3 meetings I'm doing over the next 3 days down in London. And it's about what you do as individuals to get 5 or 6 more BNP votes each week, each month, and try to get 1 or 2 of those to get 5 or 6 themselves. And it's about how much money we raise tonight and tomorrow and the day after that, because that's got to pay for the advance wave of leaflets which we're going to need to warm the whole place up, to get people talking about, you know, the BNP are standing and they're really serious, you know. They're in with a chance of winning. And it's very, very important. And I'm particularly pleased to do it for London because fundamentally I'm a Londoner. You know, I've lost most of the accent, but if I'm up north and it's in a noisy, crowded pub and so on, and they've had a couple of drinks, I can't understand a word the buggers are saying. Honestly, it's as simple as that. Down here, I can, because that's at root, you know, what I am. So I like to be here. I was born and brought up in Barnet, where I had a great childhood there. Now, the other kids there and me, we used to go and play in Hadley Wood. Some of you will know it. Looks a little bit like a bit of miniature Epping Forest, if you don't. And we used to walk to school about a mile there and a mile back. From the age of 5, the parents teamed us up, and a little group of us went without the parents, and we were free, 40 years ago, to walk a mile to and a mile from school, across, up the street, across a piece of open grassland, through the woods, more grassland to the school. And the only thing our parents ever said to any of us, and mums would say, well, don't talk to the tramps. That was it. Other than that, we were free. And if at the winter, we'll come home if you can before it's dark. And in the summer holidays, we'll come home before it's dark. And we were packed off, you know, with jam sandwiches and the bottles of cream soda that would explode if you shook them hard enough. And we were completely free to have a childhood like that, going wherever we want, without any fear. And there's not a single family in the whole of London, not the whole of southern England now, can let their 5 and 6-year-old kids out in a little group all day in a place like that. Just free and easy. Virtually none do. And I know that childhoods of kids down here in the same era was a little different. So whereas we used to go and play in the woods, out here on the marshes, you've got eels to catch and stuff like that. You know, and getting stuck in the mud and all the rest of it. So different scenery, different area. You know, my area up there, it was, I suppose, mainly a conservative sort of enclave and so on. Down here was rock solid Labour. You know, it was a middle class area. Down here, the you know, the car factory and everything else, and the dock still was the important thing. But kids, working class, middle class, we all had the same kind of upbringing because our parents, wherever we lived, even in the poorest streets of East London, felt free to let their children out and around, and we had a childhood. And it's what our kids nowadays, children growing up now, simply don't get. And it's one of the wickedest things that the Liberal establishment has done to this country by, for decades now, putting the rights of criminals and perverts and paedophiles before the rights of families and children. And when we get this country back and this city of ours back, we'll also give the children of that generation back a childhood. That's an absolute promise. So, it's not just that I was born and brought up for a while in London. My family were Londoners as well. My mother's traced the ancestry, and she can get back easily. A lot of the parish records, once you get back past the central records, they're all destroyed. Lots of our family records were in one of the parish churches in Southwark, and of course it was blitzed. So you can't actually get back any further. But she's got back on her side especially, as far as, I think it's great-great-great-grandparents. And one of them on one side of her family was the bloke who, having been born into a farming family in the village of Kensington, was sitting on a huge amount of land, and his dad was a chippy. So he built a house and another house and another house, and he ended up a fantastically wealthy man. And large amounts of the houses you see in Kensington, that he had those built. He built them. On the other hand, the same generation, the same era, slightly back on a different family tree, the earliest ancestor she can get in London before the records disappear was a stable boy in Southwark, in Crucifix Lane. And it just sums up the way that the real families of London, you know, some are high, some are low, they come up, they go down, but in the end we're still, you know, all still there, all connected, and the Londoners who are here, especially the people who came out of the East End in the first wave of white flight, as Richard was saying, you know, we really are the people who built this city. Right from the sewers that are built and are now crumbling and so on, whether it was some of my ancestors on the Thomas side, Thomas obviously, they come from South Wales. One of them, you can't trace a Thomas in South Wales, it's impossible. Especially when he came to London he was illiterate and he signed his marriage certificate with a cross. Some of the others were Irish. English, Irish and Welsh particularly, with, as Richard said, the direction of Scottish engineers, built this city. Nobody else did. You know, there's a small number. Yes, some Huguenots came early on. Some Jews came in the late 19th, early 20th century. From 1945, there were quite a few Poles here. You know, my dad was in the RAF with Polish lads. You know, and they fought for this country. They've assimilated. So none of those really changed the essential face and character of London. And then the last 40 years, absolute devastation. Literally devastation. And that's what we're fighting against. Going back to my family history a bit, because it'll be the same as your family history. But because your grandparents, or perhaps great-grandparents, in the First World War, will have seen Zeppelins flying over this city in the early bombing raids. My grandmother had a piece of a Zeppelin, one of the first ones shot down over North London. Had it in a picture frame, about this big, a piece of burnt Zeppelin canvas. And then in the Second World War, 3 of my grandparents, 3 of the 4, were air raid precaution wardens in North London. You know, my granddad was too old, well both the granddads were too old to fight, one who fought throughout the whole of the First World War, so they did their bit as ARP wardens. And I'm sure there's people here whose families had the little badges, which all they got was the memento of doing what was a thoroughly thankless and really quite dangerous task. And my grandmother also collected chunks of shrapnel for anti-aircraft shells and so on, and from bombs, which she got when she was out patrolling the streets of North London, trying to make things ever so slightly less dangerous for the ordinary people of London. And that's the sort of thing that every Londoner has got that in their family. Not only did their sweat and their effort and their sacrifice build this city, but they lived in it while it was blitzed in some places absolutely to the ground. And then they have the cheek to say, well, you know, these people have just arrived. They've got as much right to London as Londoners have. The people who built it and the people who went through hell for this city, it's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. My father was too young for the army, for the forces at the very start of the war, so he joined the Home Guard, the Home Defence League, whatever it was, to start with. And then as soon as he was old enough, he was in the RAF. And because he was, he'd been involved with radios in his father's business, they put him into radios. And each barrage balloon, which were mainly there to stop dive bombers and bombers coming in really low, they didn't want to catch enemy aircraft, they wanted to keep them up so they didn't do quite so much damage. So each one had a radio at the bottom of it, transmitting a signal. Warning, this is a barrage balloon, keep out the area. And he was one of the people who used to go around servicing to make sure, if